Hello everybody, welcome back. So this is your chapter 6 lesson. So this is part 3 of your week 3 lesson on community psychology. So in our first two parts, we looked at understanding how individuals experience their communities. And now we're going to talk about community as its own concept. All right. So, communities, of course, we've talked a little bit about this already. We know that communities can look a lot of different ways, right? A community can be very small, it can be very big, it can be based in a locality like a geographic location, and it cannot, right? It can be based relationally. So, we'll talk about that in a moment. So again, a locality-based community would be something like a neighborhood or a city block, a small town, a city, a county, a rural region, etc., right? So a lot of different ways for us to define a locality-based community. Now, a relational-based community is another really interesting way for us to conceptualize community. So an internet-based community, this is a new big one for us to consider, right? All your pals on Facebook, or if you're on Twitter or something like that, right? We know that people often do identify a sense of community with the people who they interact with via these social media tools, right? The people who comment and interact and discuss things via these different tools and methods. So some really interesting stuff there. Student organizations, some of you might be a part of, mutual help groups, things like Alcoholics Anonymous would be considered a mutual help group, a religious congregation, a workplace, a sports team. Now, those are some that would be considered both locality and relational in nature, right? Because people will often meet in one specific location, but it's for a specific purpose or based on some sort of shared activity. So, sense of community in our field, in community psychology, is one of the most important concepts that we talk about. I believe that I have talked about this every week in our class so far. Again, we know that the sense of community that people have in their life with, their neighborhood, their family, their coworkers, friends, etc. It's very, very important for people's sense of well-being. This is a quote from a fellow named Seymour Saracen, who is the community psychologist who developed this concept of sense of community. And he says, "I have never met anyone, young or old, rich or poor, black or white, male or female, educated or not, to whom I have had any great difficulty explaining what I meant by the psychological sense of community." This is just something people get, right? We get that sense of what it feels like to belong to something bigger than ourselves. So this is an image of Seymour Saracen here, and he was the first community psychologist to develop this concept of the psychological sense of community and the different qualities or factors that he felt were important in the definition of the psychological sense of community were these things right here. So he felt that it was important for us to have this perception of being similar in some way to the other people in this group, and that we felt a sense of interdependence, right? That we could depend on other people and that they could depend on us, and that we want to maintain this sense of interdependence by reciprocal interactions, right? By giving and doing and being there for other people. And that also we feel that we belong to something bigger than ourselves, right? So this is what Seymour Saracen was writing about. Then we have two other academics who come around in the 1980s and further develop Seymour Saracen's theory of sense of community. Now, McMillan and Chavez, what they really felt was that sense of community was all about this concept of belonging, that members have this feeling of belonging and that they matter to the other people in the group, and that there's some sort of shared faith or understanding that their needs will be met by committing to this group together, right? So we know that the other people who belong to this community are going to be here for us in some way or another. Now, McMillan and Chavez described how sense of community can both be very positive and negative. So people often have a hard time thinking, well, how can this possibly be negative? This just sounds great to me. And for the most part, it is, right? If you are a member of a religious organization or a sports team or a neighborhood, right? And people find out that, say, you're sick, for example, everybody rallies together. People are dropping off meals. They're helping with, some of the things that you need help with. So sense of community really does help people feel as though they belong to something important or bigger than themselves. It gives them a sense of meaning. But it can also lead to some really gross in-group, out-group kind of phenomenon, where maybe we exclude people who we do not feel belong to our group. And this is some of the more not so nice stuff about human nature that we have to understand. So, for example, we know that people who belong to first responder communities, for example, the firefighters who were first on the scene after 9/11, that they felt a very strong sense of community with the other first responders who were there and were helping on scene. There's something about a tragedy or an emergency situation that people just bond together over. And it almost creates a community in and of itself of people who have all gone through this experience together. So some really interesting stuff there. We also know that groups like this, unfortunately, also report a very high sense of community. Members of Nazi or extremist organizations or the Ku Klux Klan, for example. These are people who at the end of the day would say that they feel a very strong sense of community with the other members of their organizations. That said, there are people that they very strongly exclude from their community, be it other people of other ethnicities or nationalities or religions, etc. So this is kind of the darker side of sense of community that we need to think about when we are learning about this particular concept. We also know that, that need to belong is so strong, right? And if you are a person who does not feel like you belong somewhere, right? That it will often create this need, right? This sense of searching for something to belong to. And sometimes it can lead you down a really great path and you find a new group, great group of friends, or maybe a community organization to volunteer with, or maybe a new religious community to participate in. Awesome, right? Great. Sometimes, unfortunately, it also leads people in these kinds of directions, right? Where they start to identify with extremist kinds of organizations. This is also sometimes where gang activity can really come from too, right? Kids who come from low-income backgrounds, who maybe don't have the same kind of support at home from their parents. They might try to seek that kind of attention and belonging and acceptance from a group of people who maybe are not the healthiest people for them to be associating with, and might be unfortunately determining a set of events in their future that might be associated with crime, illegal activity, violence, etc. So unfortunately, sense of community is so strong that it can lead people down these kinds of directions as well. Now, McMillan and Chavez had 4 different aspects to their model of sense of community. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these 4 qualities of their theory for sense of community. So the first thing is the concept of membership. Obviously, that probably goes without saying that to be a member of a community, you have to be a member of a community, right? You have to feel a sense of membership or personal investment, belonging, or identification. The next concept is influence, that there has to be some sort of experience or perception of influence over the group, right? If you don't feel that, you have any say in this group, you're probably not going to want to belong to it for too long. Now, the group also has to fulfill your needs, right? There has to be some sort of sense of shared values that is achieved through this group, and exchange of resources, right? That, the needs that you have, be it to belong, be it to participate on a soccer team, to run around and get sweaty a couple times a week, right? There's something about this particular group that is meeting your needs. And the 4th part, and McMillan and Chavez really felt that this was the most important part, is shared emotional connection. So there's something about this group of other people that you're in community with that you feel a deep bond with them. And that's strengthened through these kinds of community experiences. Like, maybe your soccer team won an important match and y'all go out together for drinks after, right? You've got this celebration that you all have. So these are the 4 elements of sense of community for McMillan and Chavez's model, and you can absolutely bet that these 4 concepts will come up on your first test. So just make sure that you're familiar with each of these 4 concepts. A couple related concepts to McMillan and Chavez's model, things like neighboring, right? We know that being a member of a neighborhood is very important for a lot of people. Just having those kinds of informal contacts. Hey, can I borrow a cup of sugar, right? Can you help me, dig me out if there's a big snowstorm, stuff like that. Just to provide that kind of assistance to our neighbors. And that people really do become attached to the locality that they live in, with the physical environment that they live in, like a neighborhood or a town or the home that you grew up in, for example. Now, this concept of social capital is one of my most favorite concepts in community psychology. This is looking at how a social relationship can kind of provide a resource in and of itself, much in the same way that money does, that wealth does. So we're kind of thinking about a social relationship kind of like a resource that a person can use, and that it can benefit people, that we can use it to our benefit. Now, these are 2 related concepts to social capital that I'll leave to you to review. But basically, we know that if a person feels a strong sense of social capital, or that they have that they've got these kinds of social ties that are really important, that's been linked to things like development and maintenance of strong communities, and even a democracy, that societies that report that level of social capital really do very, very well. So, very quick review of our Chapter 6 material. We've talked about different community types, communities based on locality and relationships. Then we looked at a couple different models of sense of community, Saracen's first theory, and then McMillan and Chavez's theory. And we talked a little bit about social capital. All right, so that is the end of your week 3, Chapter 6 material. Very well done. Again, you guys are doing great work. So after today, right, you've completed your week 3 material and lesson, you can now go do your first test. So, my friends, good luck and see you next week.